Hey everyone, welcome to our customer panel. We're joined by Lexi, Adam, and Scott, and they're going to tell us how they're using LaunchDarkly to manage their migrations. Now it's time to get to know our panelists. Lexi, let's start with you. Tell us a little bit about yourself, who you work for, and what you do.
Sure, my name is Lexi Ross, and I'm a senior engineering manager right here at LaunchDarkly. I manage the core product team, so we are responsible for everything around feature flags, segments, feature workflows, approvals, all of the functionality that really makes up the bread and butter of how our customers use LaunchDarkly for feature management. And over the last year or so, I've been involved in various initiatives really tied into technology migrations that I'm excited to chat with you all about. But what I'm most excited about is that I'm working on a brand new initiative to really bring technology migrations into LaunchDarkly.
That'd be great. We definitely want to dig into that a little bit more. Adam?
Yeah, so I'm Adam Katzman. I'm a staff engineer at Relativity. Relativity's mission is to organize data, discover the truth, and act on it. So really, we just help companies manage large volumes of data for investigations, compliance, that kind of a thing. And I'm on an internal team, so I help our internal developers be as productive as they possibly can be, using the best tools in the business.
Thanks. Scott?
Hey, I'm Scott Gaines. I'm Director of Engineering at Hireology. Hireology is an all-in-one platform for managing recruiting, hiring, and building the best teams for our customers. My responsibilities really are to make sure that we're having great engineering success. We're modernizing using the best tools possible to achieve our business outcomes.
Thank you all. And so we dug into this a little bit in your intros, but I'd love to hear a little bit more about what your current initiatives that you're working on are. What are some of the outcomes you're hoping to achieve over the next year, maybe 18 months? Lexi, we'll start with you, sorry.
Sure. So most recently, we wrapped up a huge initiative that we called Custom Contexts. We launched this several months ago, and this allows customers to evaluate flags in any context, not just user. It could be organization or device or account, really whatever they choose. This involved a lot of migrations, both on the SDK side and our API. We're also in the process of wrapping up a very long-term database migration from MongoDB over to CockroachDB for basically all of our application data with zero downtime. And then looking ahead, I'm involved in sort of two initiatives really focused around new use cases that we can focus our product around. One is around release pipelines. How do we allow our customers to define their best practices and make sure all of their releases go through the same steps? And also, I am working on a project around technology migrations. How can we take some of what we've learned in our own migrations and apply it to our product and allow our customers to take advantage of feature flags in the same way?
Awesome, thank you. Adam, how about you?
Yeah, so as an internal team, a lot of what we work on is in support of larger business goals. So we're doing a lot with migrating source code from Bitbucket to GitHub, modernizing some of our CI/CD tooling and templates. But all of that is in support of what the business is trying to do, which is store more data and search it faster, really. A lot of what we're doing is moving a lot of compute from single tenant to multi-tenant infrastructure. That's a really big one that's coming up. That we can talk in so much depth about if you want. But yeah, that's kind of the big one that's going on at the company level.
Awesome. Scott?
Yeah, thanks. So Hireology has kind of one major outcome that we're driving towards, and that's to reduce churn from 18% to 10% over the next year. And so my goals basically in engineering is to help modernize the company from an engineering perspective. So we're going all up on DevOps transformation, adopting the right tools, to making sure we're on the right technology stack as well. So a lot of migrations happening in Hireology.
I think what's so interesting is that each of you all touched on different technologies that are so critical to back-end services that we just don't think about, right? Like we always think about the front-end pieces, but you all are helping move different systems, and I think that's so cool. But I know it's a lot of hard work. So another question for all of you, and we'll start on this end now, Scott. What are some of the challenges that you're facing in these migration processes?
Yeah, so I think anytime we have a migration project, there's the people challenges and then there's the technology challenges. I think first and foremost, what I've learned over my career and applying at Hireology is that you have to have a good trust-based culture. Like migrations are hard, and you have to have everyone being open and honest with each other and knowing where the challenge points are going to be and how to deal with those. Executionally, I think it's having the right tools, having the right approach, thinking about those safety nets up front. So how do we deliver software with zero downtime and making sure that our customers really don't experience any of the pain of our migrations that may happen is first and foremost.
Awesome. Adam?
Yeah, I think it's really key to just focus on what the actual outcomes you're trying to get are. I mean, at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter like where your source code lives. It's like how productive can your engineers be and how can you provide business value for that. So focusing on those right outcomes and making sure that you're constantly saying, okay, we're taking this step, are we in the right direction? We're taking this step, are we in the right direction? And that's on top of all the other challenges that Scott was talking about. You gotta have the right people, you gotta have the right tools, you gotta have the right approaches, that kind of thing. So yeah, it's always tough, but I mean, that's why it's fun, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And Lexi, you just went through a technology migration, so I'm sure you have some good challenges.
Yes, a couple of different ones. For the CockroachDB migration, which is still in progress, one of the biggest challenges is just keeping track of it all, right? We've got so many different tables and collections all owned by different teams, and being able to just have that bird's eye view to say, okay, where are we? How much do we have left? Especially when you consider that there are multiple production environments that we have to run these migrations in, right? We have our main production environment. We also have a separate a customer that's kind of hosted on a single tenant, and then we also have our federal environment for our FedRAMP customers. So there's a lot to keep track of. Not to mention the sort of zero downtime challenge. Some of our largest customers can use our system in unexpected ways, and so moving over to a new database, for instance, sometimes you're in the process of migrating, just one customer over, and all of a sudden, CPU goes through the roof, right? Your system just gets hammered. With the custom context migration, this is much more of a customer-facing migration, and so there's other challenges to deal with there. For instance, we maintain over 20 SDKs, right? Client libraries that our customers use, and when we're introducing new SDKs, we have to keep in mind that a lot of customers are not going to update right away. So there's dealing with kind of different versions of libraries, and then also updating our SDKs, maintaining backwards compatibility with old SDKs, but also wanting to introduce new functionality and not wanting to hamstring that new functionality by the backwards compatibility requirements.
For sure. Yeah, I think it's a super complex, and you all, with your experience, I think you could give some really good insights into some of the common pitfalls that you saw in your own journeys that maybe we could share with some customers. So Adam, maybe we can start with you.
Common pitfalls, boy. What pit haven't we fallen into? No, as a company, we have like 700 production instances. So just kind of to reiterate, the organization around that and the project management around that of knowing like what order does it go in, how far are we, who are we coming up to next. That was a big thing that we've definitely gotten a lot better at. Knowing, again, the specific outcomes that we're going for, sometimes we haven't been super clear on those, and it's like, okay, we're doing the thing, and then you're like, well, why are we doing the thing? And then you start to lose some of the people buy-in, you start to lose, just some of the momentum you have. That's never fun. Yeah, and sometimes you just get to the end of it and you realize that it didn't provide the outcome that you wanted, and then it's like, okay, well, we're here now. So you gotta make the best of it as you go.
Yeah, it's super interesting that you mentioned that. I think we sometimes forget that the technology migration is a component of it, but there's people who are using the software. So like, if you lose the buy-in of the people who are going to use the software, they're going to probably look elsewhere. Scott, any pitfalls that you want to share?
Yeah, I mean, I think Adam touched on some key ones there. Having people get buy-in to it is super important. As I talked about a trust-based culture, I think going through and understanding all the dependencies and really working through exactly across many teams, you might have a lot about technical challenges going on there. One of the stories that kind of comes to mind is we had a project that we ended up canceling because it was done in such a way that didn't think about migration, think about how you introduce this into the market for our customers. And so it was like being built all up off to the side. and there was no real plan of like, how are we going to migrate this data? How are we going to introduce this to our customers? And so I think really having that good plan of like how you're going to introduce that, how you're going to launch it is super important.
To dive into a couple of more of the projects that I know you both are working on, Scott, if I remember correctly, you worked on migrating from your legacy infrastructure into the cloud. Could you talk to us a little bit more about that?
Sure, yeah. So we're actually in the cloud. The challenge we had is we built in AWS, we built, I would call it a traditional environment. Okay. It was very server-based, a lot of manual pieces and parts. It was very brittle. And so one of the things that we found was really important is to adopt and modernize cloud best practices. In conjunction with that, we decided that because we're making a technology switch to Microsoft.NET for our programming paradigm, we decided to also migrate to Microsoft Azure. So that's a big component that we're working on there. And we want to make sure it's all very seamless and customers don't feel any of the change.
Yeah, the mentality of like lift and shift doesn't always really work if you're trying to just rebuild like your on-prem data centers in a cloud environment.
Yeah, exactly.
Adam, I heard you were doing some migrations with the APIs. Would love to hear more about that.
Yeah, so similarly, our strategy was to lift and shift into the cloud from on-prem, and we lifted very successfully, and it's just been a lot of shifting. So like what we're doing right now is, again, a lot of API migrations from single tenant, like running on a VM specific to a customer, to like a Kubernetes-based .NET Core API. So it's a long journey, and we're just starting, but we have some great plans that involve LaunchDarkly, and I'm confident that it's gonna go well.
Well, you segued me perfectly because I was gonna say, now we can dive into a little bit on the LaunchDarkly piece. Adam, we'd love to hear like, when did you become a customer, and kind of what was your adoption story of LaunchDarkly?
Yeah, so our adoption story is, it's been ongoing, I guess. So we had an internal platform that we called Relativity Toggles, and that served us really well in our on-prem world and for the start of that lift and shift time. About 3 years ago, we kind of realized that there were certain needs that our internal framework had that our internal framework didn't meet. So we started looking around, and we ended up adopting LaunchDarkly just as like a replacement backend to our Toggles framework. That was great, but we never did anything beyond like a very simple like on-off switch, because we hid LaunchDarkly kind of behind the curtain. We said, all right, developers, it's the same thing you're used to. It just it goes to this SaaS product instead. So we didn't start really adopting LaunchDarkly until last fall, when we started letting more people into the platform and saying, hey, there's a lot of value in this platform. Like, get behind the curtain, go figure it out. There's bells and whistles, there's all these knobs you can turn. Like, you're closest to your business problem, we're not gonna stand in your way anymore. So really, our adoption has been the last 6 to 9 months, but we've been using it for about 3 years.
Awesome, thank you. Scott, same question.
Yeah, I've been a customer of LaunchDarkly for about 4.5 years. I brought it into Hierology about a year ago. My journey is started with basically, in my last organization, we had a proprietary flagging solution, and it was always this constant discussion of when you're trying to plan new features and prioritize things. It's like, well, we can't do that because we got to update the feature flagging system and such like that. And I really am a strong believer of core versus context, and our core was not feature flagging. So I said, let's go out and look for something that can help us be successful. And we also had built multiple microservices, different products, and the flagging system ended up getting locked into one piece. And so you couldn't leverage it elsewhere. So we spent a lot of time really getting LaunchDarkly adopted into the environment. And I had very ambitious goals from taking our organization from deploying once a month to basically 12 times a day. And we realized that in order to do that, we needed good safety nets and a feature management solution that could do that for us. And LaunchDarkly is that one.
Well, appreciate that, and that's awesome to hear. So going from once a month to multiple times a day, wow, that's huge.
It's fun.
And specifically for your migration processes, I'd love to hear from both of you about how you used LaunchDarkly, and Lexi, I'd love to hear internally how we used LaunchDarkly for managing our own migration. So maybe Scott, start with you.
Sure. Yeah, so for our cloud modernization, which also encompasses modernizing some of our software components, we're moving from React, a legacy version of React, to Next.js. And also with the move from AWS to Azure, we decided we're going to kind of use LaunchDarkly to tackle that together. So the first thing we did is we put Microsoft's Azure front door in front of both our environment and both our clouds. And then what we did is we introduced LaunchDarkly everywhere throughout our software. So we said when we're going to do a deployment, it's going to be stateless. We're going to decouple features from deployment. And what we have is LaunchDarkly is feature flagging where they go to render the UI. So when we have a flag that's off, it goes to AWS and serves up the old architecture. And when we turn it on, it routes over to Azure and serves up our new Next.js front end. So it's been really great. We've done percentage rollouts over our ICP customers over the last couple weeks. And we have very close eye on telemetry and such there. We actually also introduced a self-healing feature using LaunchDarkly in combination with our telemetry tool, Datadog, which allows us to basically hook up monitors, and when something looks like it's going wrong on the Azure side or AWS side, it flips to the other version. So it's a good safety net for our customers.
I have so many interesting technology questions on there. I've been playing with Next a lot. It's a lot of fun, but we'll save that. Adam, how about you? How about you all?
Yeah, so one of the APIs that we're looking at migrating right now is related to our document viewer. So again, huge amounts of data. What lawyers are doing is they're reviewing documents, is it relevant to the cases and not. So performance is really important because when you have lawyers looking at documents, you don't want to waste their time. Obviously, accuracy is important too. But so we're migrating some of these APIs from a web server to Kubernetes, and some of the APIs are public and some are private. So we actually have two different strategies to handle those. So for the private ones, what we're doing is, version 1 is running in tenant here. A new version at a different route, we're building and deploying to Kubernetes over here. And then we're using LaunchDarkly to toggle the traffic between them. And what we're actually doing, it's like a 3-phase. It's run traffic through the web server, monitor it, put it all in new reg of that APM, send traffic to both, and then measure both like the network latency, SQL latency, all of that stuff, compare that, send that APM, but only serve up to the customer that original traffic. And then as we build confidence and say, okay, yeah, all of our dashboards are green, all of our responses are the same, all of our latency is not any slower, then we can flip to that third state of the new one. For the public APIs, it's a little more complicated, but we're still using LaunchDarkly to actually control route by route in a reverse proxy. So again, we're switching some traffic over, but we're flowing most of it through reverse proxies, back to the tenant, and then measuring the latency, measuring the accuracy, all of that while we do percentage rollouts, keep a really close eye on APM, make sure everything's staying the same.
I think it's so cool because in microservice environments, I think people sometimes forget that you're running software in there, so you can put a feature flag in a container. That's totally fine, and it works fantastic. Lexi, I think one of the cool things that we do at LaunchDarkly is we use LaunchDarkly ourselves for a lot of our stuff. So maybe give some insights as far as how we've used LaunchDarkly for our migrations.
Yeah, absolutely. So we dog food our own product extensively, right? Almost any change made by an engineer is put behind a feature flag, whether it's a brand new feature or a performance improvement or even a bug fix. We often feature flag those as well because you never know, something might go wrong, and it's so much easier to just flip a flag than to deal with reverts and rollbacks. So in incidents, feature flags are always the first thing we look to. We say, hey, is this issue flagged? Can we just turn something off? As far as migrations go, I'm pretty excited about the system that we eventually kind of landed on after a lot of iteration, which is essentially we used feature flags to be able to do something similar to the 3-stage process you described, but more stages because we're dealing with data here. So it's basically a stateful migration, right? So we have MongoDB as our old system and CockroachDB as our new system, right? We start off, the first step we take is we start doing dual writes. So our database writes are now going to both systems. At this point, we can run a backfill script so that everything that happened before we started those dual writes is also represented in CockroachDB in the new system. Now here's where it gets interesting. We have a feature flag. And all these dual writes, everything, this is controlled by feature flags. We have this other feature flag to control database reads. And this actually has 4 modes, which are represented by variations, right? It's a multivariate flag. we start in what we call off mode, right? We're simply just reading from the old system, nothing changes. Next, once we've turned on these dual writes and run our backfill script, we go into what we call shadow mode. So shadow mode, we are still, the source of truth is still the old system. So from a customer's perspective, there should be no change and very low risk. But we're also reading from the new database. And we're comparing those values and logging some kind of an error if they don't match. So this is what we call our verification step. And this allows us to basically start running the new system, start doing reads in the background with no risk. Because if there's differences, customers aren't going to know, because that's not what's getting returned. Once we feel confident that we are running successfully in shadow mode, all we do is just swap. We go shadow to live. Now we are still reading from both old and new system, but the source of truth is the new system. So we're continuing to verify. And once we have that running for a while, the final step is to simply turn off the old system. I say simply, of course, this all takes a while, right? But eventually, we're able to turn off both reads and writes to the old system, rip out the code, and eventually just decommission this old system, which, we're almost there. It's going to be a very exciting moment when we do. And then the final thing we do to make this process as safe as possible is we migrate in cohorts. So rather than just having a single default rule on the flag that goes, across the 4 variations, we'll start with maybe, internal users, and then we actually did this by customer size. So we did all customers except for, I believe, our top 12 in terms of data size. This was for migrating our flags collection. No surprise, it's the largest one we've got. Millions of records. And so then we kind of gradually, actually, I believe once we got to the top 8 customers, we just did one by one, because this is where things got very dangerous. And we really wanted to keep a close eye on that telemetry. But yeah, I think the sort of shadow live mode really helped us to not have any major incidents when it came to correctness. And to quickly, roll back any issues around CPU, et cetera.
That's great. Yeah, and I think each of you all touched on a point which I think is really important for folks who are watching this to understand, is that you all are dealing with huge amounts of data. And so being able to control that and use flagging to be able to kind of compartmentalize the right size of your migration, it's huge, because it just puts the power into your hands. Now, that being said, you all described what I think some people would say are some complicated setups. What's some advice that you might all have for how folks should get started with feature flagging and with LaunchDarkly? Lexi, internally, what do you usually say?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in terms of getting started, I think there's kind of the basic usage of LaunchDarkly is Boolean flags, right? A lot of times when folks think of feature flags, they think of something that can be either on or off, maybe to all customers. And I think that can be a really solid place to start. And oftentimes when we're replacing an in-house system, that's kind of the first thing to replace. But I think it's really useful to kind of gradually pull in more functionality, right? So one is targeting rules. Being able to target different parts of your user base. Maybe it's separating your beta users or a specific segment from the rest of your customers. Or maybe it is using a custom targeting rule to look at the domain that your customers are coming from. There's really infinite possibilities. But then there's also multivariate flags. And I think more of our customers should take advantage of multivariate flags, because there's a lot you can do with them, right? It's how we run migrations, right? We need those 4 variations. It's also can be really useful for running experiments. We didn't even get to talk about experimentation, but that's a whole other world. If you're trying to select the best variation. So yeah, I would say just kind of start simple. We have SDKs in almost all common languages and libraries, and so just start with one that feels pretty straightforward and kind of layer on from there.
Don't worry, we have an experimentation summit coming up later this year. We will fully dive into that. So good plug there. Scott, what would you recommend?
Yeah, I mean, I think through my experiences, having great evangelists is the first thing you want to do. When you've done it for a while, it seems very natural, and that's the thing, you just flag stuff. But when an organization hasn't been there before, it seems very scary. You're like, why do I have to do this around every piece of code I write? And why is this just feels like overhead. And so when you get good champions in there, and then they're the ones demonstrating that expertise, and they're helping you build those good wrappers and those good security controls around your targeting and things like that, it makes the story go a lot smoother. I would say beyond that, it's thinking about how you're targeting, right? So is your organization targeting by a company? Is it targeting by a user, by a device, whatever that is? And really kind of craft those stories out there. What I've found is like initially folks might think, oh yeah, we're just going to target by every user, and then they start to uncover all these other interesting use cases. And then if you don't kind of explore that right away, you start instrumenting in your code in maybe not the most ideal way. So I think it's important to kind of shake those two things out first.
Sure. Adam?
Yeah, I mean, basically what they said. I think the only thing I would add is like, I mean, hopefully you all work with smart people. I work with really smart people, and it was really awesome to just be like, hey, go through LaunchDarkly Academy, which is great, by the way. I don't know who built that, but it's like really helpful, and it hammers home some of those really basic points that like when you're in it for a while, you're like, oh yeah, just put it behind a flag, but you don't really think like, oh, I can do all of these things. But putting those resources in front of your smart coworkers, they will come up with really smart solutions. And like I can't dictate how a team should roll a feature out. Like that should be up to the product manager on that team. And that's another great thing about LaunchDarkly. The user interface makes it really easy for me to say, hey, like non-technical person, like how do you want to roll this out? How can we integrate it so there's less risk, with our APM tools? How can we do percentage by percentage based rollouts? There's a lot there. And honestly, like, yeah, you got to have a champion. You got to, make sure you know what you're doing. But just letting people use the tool, like, they come up with better things than I would come up with for them because, they know their specific migration nuances and their specific risk factors, so they can solve for that.
Thank you all for that. Yeah, it was funny. One of the things that I heard a long time ago is that the best way to get started with feature flagging is just to start putting feature flags into your code. And then from there, it just kind of grows, right? Like you just learn and figure out some different use cases. So Adam, I want to dig into a point that you mentioned earlier. You talked about the ability to empower product managers on your team or non-technical folks. Can you talk a little bit more about that, about how you're using LaunchDarkly to kind of enable other people within the company?
Yeah, so that's relatively new, and it's something we're still trying to get better at because we didn't let them even have that capability until late last fall. But we're doing a lot of outreach, and there are some product managers who just get it, and then some of them, because they've never had that ability before, it's still very new to them. So there's a really wide spectrum of kind of the outreach that we're trying to do, but really focusing on like who their customers are, what risks they have, and then sitting with them and being like, okay, like is it like a region-based thing? Is it a customer size-based thing? Is it like this customer's mad about something, so do them last kind of a thing? Just talking through all the things that they can do, because sometimes they don't have that light bulb go off just naturally. But yeah, sitting with them, talking about their risks and just making sure that they feel comfortable with it is a really powerful thing to do.
For sure, and I think it kind of breaks that stigma of this idea of like, feature flags are a developer tool, right? Like you have to know how to code to be able to use it. Like, no, that's why we have a UI.
I've taken great joy in not answering questions because people are like, oh, well, like how should we release this? I was like, I don't know. Ask your product manager. How should they release their product? Because yeah, historically it has been a very like dev-centric question of like, especially with deploys, but like once you decouple that and you say, okay, it's out there, like you just gotta decide where to turn it on. And like if you wanna run this experiment or this A/B test, like you tell me what you wanna do and we can do it. So it's been a really great selling point. And when that light bulb does finally go off, it's great to see.
It's fantastic. Now, all of you have mentioned targeting at some point. Scott, I would love to hear, how are you all using targeting rules or context targeting within LaunchDarkly?
Yeah, so we do have, at Hierology, our business is really kind of organizational and user-based, but we also do a little bit of device targeting because we have mobile applications and we may want to roll out a feature in iOS version whatever versus Android. So those are kind of our three sweet spots that we have there. We do a lot of segmenting and targeting based on our ideal customer profiles versus some of the kind of smaller organizations. So we may start with like smaller organizations, just kind of test the health of the server or the health of the feature, and then we start rolling it out to our ICPs. And we may even specifically target some of those for beta users or even like kind of a public preview type of capability. One of the things that we're actually working on building right now is a user-facing feature so that end users can go in and look at preview features and toggle them on and off themselves.
Oh wow, that's really cool. So you're really putting the power in your customers' hands to
Exactly.
kind of customize their experience using feature flags.
Yeah.
That's really cool. Lexi, at the top of this, you mentioned a little bit about like some of the future of what we're doing with the LaunchDarkly platform around technology migrations. Can you give us a little bit of a sneak peek about like what's coming up?
Yeah, absolutely. So what I described around the way we did our database migration, it's basically that. Imagine you can do that in a very first-class way, right? Being able to take your migration from off to shadow to live to complete, and being able to do that not only in a first-class way from the LaunchDarkly application, but also within your SDKs. Imagine in your SDK, rather than simply getting the value of a feature flag. Because for us, one thing I didn't really mention about our migrations is we also have to have a lot of logic in our code, right? To say, are we in shadow mode? Are we in live mode? Do this, do that. What if all of that could happen in LaunchDarkly, right? What if you could simply say, LaunchDarkly migrate, pass in your flag key, your old implementation, your new implementation, and then some kind of correctness check, right? Some kind of verification to make sure old and new match. And then boom, your migration just happens. We give you back whatever value is the source of truth. Now this is all in very early stages, but that's kind of the vision that we're thinking about, right? And then also thinking about guardrails. How do we prevent you from shooting yourself in the foot don't make the same mistakes we did, essentially. For instance, there is an invariant around migrations where once you're in that complete mode and you've turned off your old system, you actually can't go back. Right? Because now you have data inconsistency. You'd have to, essentially run a reverse backfill to get your old to match your new again, and you probably don't want to do that. Yeah. So essentially, you can think of going from that live mode over to complete as a one-way door. So how do we actually enforce that? And if you're migrating by cohorts, how do we make sure that you're actually partitioning your data in like a consistent way? Let's say you're always partitioning by user key or account or organization or something. So that's been a lot of the challenge is taking something that we did as humans and making it into a product that actually works and not only works well, but also works for, let's say 80 to 90% of what our customers are trying to do. And that can be difficult when everyone kind of has their own types of migrations they're doing, right? Some are stateful, some are API migrations, some are even, front-end migrations, and how many of these cases can we support? But yeah, we hope to have something exciting to show y'all by Galaxy, which is our conference coming up in October. But for now, we're in pretty early stages.
Thank you. Yeah, it's I almost feel like with feature flagging, you need to have the retrospective and then the flag cleanup, just so that nobody can go and like kind of mess with the old values,
right.
or lock it out. One of the things like I feel like we've kind of made this assumption through this whole conversation that like migrations are inevitable, and I think that they are. And so what I'd love to hear from each of you is just like some insights of like why are these changes coming up, or like what are the reasons that you all look to move to new frameworks or new technologies? Scott, we can start with you.
Yeah, sure. At Hierology, we have, as I mentioned earlier, we have an ambitious goal to reduce churn from 18 to 10%. And with that, we're finding that there's a lot of technical debt in our system. So historically, Hierology has kind of been caught in that build trap. It's just rip new features out, and we lost sight of like maintaining the system. And so now we've looked at it and said, like, what is the right path forward? How do we get more agility out of this? How do we really deliver bigger outcomes for our customers? And with that, we determine we need to make some technical migrations happen for that.
Makes sense. Adam?
Yeah, I think migrations are definitely they're a given. It's just going to happen. The software industry itself is pretty young. I mean, they're still coming out with new ways to build bridges, and we've been doing that for how many thousands of years? Like everything is changing every single day. So a lot of the drivers, beyond just the new shiny, is keeping new developers coming in, keeping existing developers happy. Like, no one wants to be working on 10-year-old tech because that doesn't look good on a resume. There's not the resources out there around it. So keeping people happy, making sure that you're actually leveraging new frameworks and systems that are faster than the old ones and are easier to learn than the old ones and cheaper to run than the old ones. Those are all reasons why, migrations are just a given at this point. Hopefully, you're not taking baby steps with them. You're taking big enough steps that you actually have time to get the value out of that migration before you have to do it again. But it's going to happen. Just you got to prepare for it.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting is you all have mentioned multiple different migrations that we're undergoing, but you're all doing them incrementally, right? Like you're not saving them all for one big flip the switch and just kind of hope for the best. But Lexi, what do you think about all the changes that we've gone through?
Yeah, similar to what you both have said, I would also add companies change, right? It's not just the technologies evolve and grow, but organizations grow, and oftentimes the right technology to use as a 10-person startup, right, or a pre-revenue company is very different from a 500-person company or 100 million ARR company. And so I think as you grow, you start to have different needs. Engineering teams grow and have different processes, and so I think technology migrations are inevitable for that reason as well. But there is always that trade-off, and it's something that we think about a lot at LaunchDarkly of, getting our infrastructure to the next level while also continuing to deliver new functionality to customers, right? And I think you can't lean too far on either end of the spectrum. You can't just grind, new feature development to a standstill for a long time while you migrate everything and get all your technology to a place where you're really excited about. There's probably always going to be migrations and things like that you want to do that there just isn't time for. At the same time, if you ignore all of that for too long, you get into a state where you're saddled with tech debt and you kind of have no choice but to grind things to a halt.
Yeah, so you're saying that eventually you got to migrate from the WordPress word blog for your company site to eventually having a full-on
Exactly.
Great. So I know we're getting close to our time here. I'd love for each of you just to kind of give some insight. We covered so many topics today. What's one thing that you hope that people walk away from this discussion with? So Scott, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I think hopefully the one thing I could share is that you don't have to make migration scary, right? That you can use a tool like LaunchDarkly to make it smooth, easy, effective, and control it in a way that we all talk about releasing a feature and how exciting it is. But I think the thing that is most amazing about LaunchDarkly is it actually is very uneventful to turn the flag on and be like, yeah. Okay, we're done. And that's such an amazing point when you think historically about doing these big migrations. You're up late at night, you're sweating, and it's 3 a.m., and you're hoping everything goes well. And I think that's hopefully the message I'd like to share is you can make these things painless.
Adam?
Those exact same words. I know a big thing with LaunchDarkly is risk-free releases, and it doesn't have to be a feature release. It can be a migration release as well. Yes, they're big. Yes, they're scary. You can't put them off too long or they get too big and too scary. But it's something that you can do. You can think about your risks. You can mitigate them. You can do it incrementally as long as you're building two-way doors and you're monitoring those migrations. They don't have to be a big deal. And it's really nice to know that it's really nice when you don't get paged at 2 a.m. because you're doing these things incrementally during the day. You can watch and see how they're doing, all that stuff. So migrations happen, but they're not scary.
Lexi?
Yeah, I think these two said it perfectly. One thing we've joked about internally as a tagline for LaunchDarkly is make releases boring. They don't have to be stressful or even that exciting, right? If everything is in place, you know exactly what's going to happen. If anything goes wrong, you can always pull back. I'm, happy with the way we've used LaunchDarkly internally to manage our migrations, and I'm very excited about the prospect of, bringing that to customers because it sounds like there certainly is a need for, a first-class tool. So hope folks get excited about that.
Awesome. And there you have it. Technology migrations don't have to be scary. I want to thank Lexi, Adam, and Scott for their insights today, and I hope you all enjoy the rest of the summit.